I died. But I'm still here. Sounds strange, doesn't it? I used to think so too. But then one day my body stopped breathing. My heart stopped beating. I left the shell I had lived and drifted away light as air. No pain. No panic. Just a perfect separation. And that it was when I began to truly live. My name is Evelyn Carter. I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan, a place cold in the winter and filled with the hum of cicadas in the summer. My family was Catholic, and from a very young age I believed in God, but it was a God I feared. A God who was always watching, always keeping score, and always ready to punish. I grew up afraid. Afraid of making mistakes. Afraid of dying without confession. Afraid I wasn't good enough to be forgiven. Even as an adult, even when my mind told me it wasn't true, that fear still lived deep inside me like a scar that never fully faded. I have 3 children, and a marriage that ended after 12 years. My husband left, and I was alone with 3 mouths to feed and a shattered heart. I moved to Lexington, Kentucky, and started over. During the day I worked, and at night I studied nursing. 3 years without a full night's sleep. In 2002, I finally graduated as a nurse and was hired into the hospital's advanced cardiac unit. I used to think that if I was the one saving other people, then maybe I wouldn't need to save myself. I thought I could handle it, that I was fine, but I was wrong. It was a summer afternoon in 2014. I was in the kitchen with my daughter. My oldest was making a strawberry smoothie. I remember it clearly because strawberries were my least favorite fruit. And maybe that's why I died that day. I took a sip. Just one sip. And then I couldn't swallow. My tongue went numb. Saliva poured from my mouth uncontrollably. I scratched around my lips, feeling like 1,000 ants were crawling under my skin. I had a known allergy to shellfish, but I had never reacted this quickly before. With my experience as an ICU nurse, I knew exactly what acute anaphylaxis was. And I knew I had maybe 10 minutes before my airway would shut down for good. I injected the first EpiPen. My son drove me to the ER. Everything was starting to blur. And when we arrived, there was no bed, no hallway full of rushing doctors. There was only a wheelchair and indifference. I tried to tell the nurse, I'm an anaphylaxis. I can't breathe. She looked at me as if I was overreacting. But I knew if I didn't act fast, I was going to die. You never really know how close death is until you see yourself from outside your body. And that was the moment I left mine. The room became suddenly quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, but a silence of disconnection of something being severed. I looked down and saw a woman lying motionless, surrounded by doctors' machines and the sound of emergency alarms. I looked at her and thought, she looks awful. I hope she's okay. It took a few more seconds before I realized that was me. I was floating. There was no floor, no ceiling, no gravity, and no sense of time. I didn't know where I was going, or if I was even going anywhere at all. There was only one thing I knew for certain. I was no longer alive. The place I entered was unlike anywhere on earth. It wasn't heaven, not the way books describe it, and it wasn't hell either. It was an absolute void, a living darkness, and I was trapped inside it. I wasn't standing. I wasn't sitting. I wasn't lying down. I had no form, and yet I was still me. I still had memories, emotions, and one single question. Where am I? At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I thought I had been forgotten, that no one even knew I was gone. I began to doubt if my life had ever been real. What if it was all just a dream? What if I never really existed? I wanted to scream, but in that place, there was no sound. Every time I tried to cry out, only silence came echoing back. Time in that place was a loop with no end. I had no idea how long I'd been there. A few hours? A few years? I remember thinking, if I'm dead, why do I still feel? Then something shifted, not around me but within me. I tried to learn, and something strange happened. I moved, not with my feet, but with a thought. I discovered that if I simply thought of a direction, I would begin to move that way. I learned how to swim through the darkness with no destination in sight. And then I saw a light, not a blinding light like in the movies, just a faint glow, soft and golden like a lamp flickering in a distant room. I moved closer. The nearer I got, the more I saw a wall. But it wasn't a normal wall. It was breathing. It looked like frosted glass, rippled and shifting like the old glass blocks in a bathroom wall. I reached out and touched it, cold, but alive. And then I saw what was on the other side. I saw myself lying in an ICU room. My arms were strapped to the hospital bed. A breathing tube down my throat. surrounded by machines, flashing lights, doctors, and nurses. I could see everything clearly, even the numbers on the blood pressure monitor. I even recognized the medication dripping into the fore, because I had been a nurse. That's me. I'm not completely gone? And then, I saw my daughter. She was standing there wearing a winter flannel shirt in the middle of summer. I gave a quiet, aching smile. I could see every thread in that shirt as if I could reach out and touch it. I had never really known what she felt. She was private, not one to show emotion. But in that moment, I felt it. I felt her fear, her pain, her fear of losing her mother, and my heart broke into pieces. I wanted to hold her. I wanted to run to her and say, "Mom's right here." But my hand hit the wall. I was furious. I screamed. For the first time in this death, I felt like a child angry at God. If you love me, why would you let me see this? Why not let me go back, or take me all the way? And then I was pulled back. Darkness covered me once more. The loop began again. I thought I would be stuck in the darkness forever. I began to wonder, maybe this is the place for those who weren't good enough for heaven, but not bad enough for hell. And then, I heard something break. The sound was like ice cracking on Lake Michigan when spring begins to arrive. Deep and groaning, as if something was breaking the darkness from the inside out. Light started to leak through the cracks. I shivered. Not from the cold, but from hope. I didn't need to be touched. Just being in its presence, I knew I was safe. The last remnants of darkness, as they touched that circle of light, melted away. Not vanished, but erased. I broke down like a lost child finding her mother. I wept not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief, the gratitude. And then my grandmother's voice came not through my ears, but straight into my soul. "Breathe, my love. Calm your heart." I asked her, "But Grandma, you died." She smiled. "No, Evelyn. There's no such thing as death. You know that." "No." I asked, confused. "Yes," she said. "You've learned this before. Energy can't be created or destroyed. It only transforms." Suddenly, I remembered a lesson from childhood physics class. Life is energy, and energy never dies. And I understood. This was life after death. Not an ending, but a continuation. A lighter, deeper, more loving form of existence. I began to remember. Who was I? What I used to dream of. What I once loved. And how I had forgotten myself. She guided me through the light. No footsteps, just the intention of movement. Every place we passed was a memory. A reminder. A version of me that had once lived fully, then been forgotten. I asked her, "Grandma, am I dead?" She said, "Not yet. You're in between. Part of you is still in that body. And part of you, your soul, is here. And between those two parts, there is a cord. If you choose to stay, the cord will break. If you choose to return, you'll be pulled back." I whispered, "So I get to choose?" She nodded. "You always do." For the first time in my life, I was no longer afraid of dying. And I was no longer afraid of living. I understood. Death is not the end. It is the remembering that we once existed in the light before we forgot that we are the light. The light appeared. Not blinding. Not overwhelming. It came like a warm, wise, and full of knowing wave. And I realized I was standing before the Creator. I don't know how to describe that moment precisely when everything inside me trembled like an earthquake, not in the ground but in every cell, every layer of emotion I had kept locked away for years. A force surged from every direction, yet strangely, it didn't terrify me. On the contrary, it made me certain, He is coming. I didn't see a form, but I knew. A knowing that needed no teacher, no explanation. Like hearing a piece of music that once touched the deepest part of your soul, and with just one note, you remember. You recognize. It was Him. I thought I would be judged. I used to believe that if I ever stood before God, it would be the moment of reckoning. But what happened next is something I will never forget. There was no accusation, no book of sins being opened. No piercing eyes were counting every mistake I had made. There was only love, so overwhelming it made me weep. Pure love. It felt as if my brain had been switched off, as if every thought had been gently pulled away and replaced with absolute stillness. I didn't need to think anymore. I only needed to experience. And then a scene appeared. I was standing in a small grocery store many years ago. A woman I didn't know was struggling at the checkout counter short on a few coins, trying to buy enough food for her family. Without hesitation, I pulled out my wallet and gave her the money. At the time, I didn't think twice. It was a small gesture. But God showed me what came from that moment, a ripple effect like a chain reaction of grace. That woman from years ago later went on to work at a food charity. And when another young mother came in struggling to make ends meet, she looked at her and said, "I understand. Don't be ashamed, I was once just like you." I broke down in tears. I had never imagined that such a small act could ripple out so far, so deeply. And in that moment, I understood, no act of kindness is ever meaningless. Then I thought, if he showed me the good, surely the next would be the bad. And I was right. I was shown a moment in time when I worked with a difficult colleague. I didn't hate her, but in my mind I carried countless judgments, complaints, and silent criticisms. And then God showed me the pain behind her personality, the wounds she carried from childhood, the abuse, the loneliness. And finally, I saw her choosing to become a nurse anyway despite it all, so she could care for others. And he said, "Thoughts carry energy. Your thoughts are not invisible. They touch others even when unspoken. When you think negatively about someone, you are feeding the very wound they carry." I choked up. I had always believed I was better than others because I didn't speak the negativity out loud. But now I understand that even silent judgment is a form of poison. In that moment, something deeper than anger rose inside me. I couldn't hold it back. I cried out to him, "Why? Why didn't you save me from those losses? Why didn't you protect me, keep my family together, and help my husband change? I prayed. I trusted you. So where were you?" I thought I had crossed a line, said something I wasn't supposed to say. But he didn't get angry. He simply responded gently, "You misunderstood me. Let me show you." And I was shown the future. I saw my son, now a father, sitting next to me in the bleachers, watching his 5-year-old play soccer. He turned to me and said, "I'm going to be the kind of father I once wished I had." And I wept. I understood then that the breaking of my family was not a punishment. It was a crack where the light could enter. It was how the cycle of pain would end. And if I had to suffer so my son could become a better father, I would accept it. I looked toward the light, and for the first time in this entire journey, I felt peace. I understood. I was never abandoned. I had simply not yet grown enough to see that everything happens for a reason. I don't know how long it took me to decide. There was no clock, no time, only a knowing. If I took one more step into that light, the cord connecting me to my body would break. Forever. I looked back. I saw myself, that small, fragile body lying motionless in the hospital bed. I saw my daughter, gripping her mother's hand, trembling. I saw my husband with his eyes red with tears, trying to stay strong. And I remembered everything. The dreams I hadn't lived. The words I hadn't said. The hugs I owed my children. The moments I stayed silent when I should have said, "I love you." And then no one spoke, but I knew it was time to choose. And I whispered in my soul, "I want to live. This time, truly live." The moment I thought those words, the light where God stood began to fade like morning mist meeting the sun. I was no longer suspended in the invisible realm. I was being pulled back, through layers of energy, memories, emotions, pain, and love. And then, I fell. Not gently, not softly. Coming back into my body felt like diving into a suit of rusted armor, stiff, aching, suffocating that I jolted awake. Bright lights. The steady beeping of machines. A nurse standing beside my bed, her eyes wide with shock as she saw me open mine. "Oh my God, you're awake." I wanted to say, "I just met God." But my throat was dry, and no words would come out. I simply nodded, as tears spilled uncontrollably down my face. The first feeling of coming back was not relief. It was a shock, disorientation, the deep, aching sense that I no longer belong here. I spent many days in the hospital. Doctors came and went, asked questions, ran tests, but no one ever asked, "Where did you go?" Only I knew that I had stepped into the space between life and death. And I came back carrying a sacred gift, a new awareness of existence. I'll never forget one night, when the hospital room lights were turned off and silence fell. I turned my face to the wall, and the tears just came. I whispered as if speaking to God, "Are you still here?" A warm presence washed over my body. Not wind, not the heater, but a presence, like an invisible embrace. And I heard it not with my ears, but with my soul. I never left. There's something no one tells you. Coming back from death is not easy. People think waking up after a near-death experience is a miracle. And medically it is. But spiritually, it's an earthquake. I was no longer the same. But everyone around me was. They looked at me like someone who had just come out of a coma. They asked questions, offered sympathy, and congratulated me. But no one asked, "What did you see on the other side?" Because they didn't believe. And maybe they were afraid. They're afraid. Afraid of the truth that there is another world existing parallel to ours, a world where every thought radiates energy. A world where anonymous kindness is remembered and silent judgment has consequences. I used to think, maybe I'm going crazy, because I started to see light where others only saw white walls. I could feel the pain behind someone's eyes. I could hear loneliness in their silence. And I felt a calling, a responsibility to share. But I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid. Afraid of being laughed at. Afraid of being seen as delusional. Afraid that even my own family would think I made it all up just because I had come so close to death. So I stayed silent. I went back home. Tried to return to work, to being a wife, a mother. But something no longer fit. I looked at my husband, the man who had once been my safe place, and suddenly he felt like a stranger. I looked at my children, and all I wanted was to hold them tight each night, because I now knew we could leave this world at any moment. Every morning I walked alone, sat in the park, watched the trees, and the tears would come not from sadness, but from gratitude. Grateful that I was still here, that I still had time, but inside, I was still wrecked. I carried two souls inside me, the one that had died and the one just reborn. And they clashed constantly. One whispered, "Forget it. Go back to your old life. Be normal." The other whispered, "No. You've seen the light. You have a mission." I lived like that for months, awake, but somehow still dreaming, until one day, I received a message from an old friend. His name was Brian. He had once asked if I'd like to attend a conference by the Near-Death Experience Research Association in Cincinnati. I had always said no. Excuses about my health. Not feeling ready. Telling myself I wasn't strong enough. But that day, I looked at the message, and before my mind had time to reason, I pressed yes. And it was the first time I truly said yes to life. I used to think that death was the greatest shock of my life. But it turns out living on was the real shock. And that simple yes, I said to Brian, agreeing to speak at a Life After Death conference, was the first time I unlocked the handcuffs I had put on myself. I still remember that day clearly, a gray afternoon, golden leaves scattered across the steps, and my heart trembling like a child standing in front of the class for the very first time. I wasn't a speaker. I was just someone who had died. And maybe that's exactly why. I carried a truth. A fire that could no longer be extinguished. That day, I shared everything. The sudden allergic reaction. The moment I left my body. The darkness I was trapped in. And the light I was allowed to touch. I spoke about my grandmother, how she welcomed me on the other side with green eyes and hair like fire. I spoke about God not as a distant figure in the sky, but as a presence of light that wrapped around me, reached into every cell, and tore through every belief, every fear, every sorrow I had ever carried. And then I shared the message he placed deep inside me. I never left. I am in every neuron, every cell, every human whisper. Whether you see me or not, I am still me. I am the light. The entire room went silent. Not from doubt, but from something deeper, a holy stillness. I didn't speak with persuasive words. I spoke the truth that now lived inside me. When I stepped off the stage, an elderly woman with silver hair and tears in her eyes took my hand. She whispered, "You don't know me, but I lost my daughter last year, in an accident. And today I know she's still here. Thank you." I couldn't say a word. I just nodded and held her for a long, long time. That was the moment I understood. Sharing isn't a duty, it's healing. For myself. For others. For the world. From that day on, I was no longer someone running away. I became a storyteller. I spoke in churches, in schools, at community centers, on podcasts, in videos. I spoke about my near-death experience not as some strange miracle, but as a sacred reminder, just how precious life is, and how easily we waste it. I spoke about how I once lived as if I were already dead, shrinking myself, rejecting love, fearing pain, and building a prison of loneliness around my own heart. I told them, I once saw myself lying in the ICU bed, my hands strapped down, and the fear in that room wasn't from pain, it was from helplessness. And then, I shared how I came back, not through medical technology, but through light flowing into me, bit by bit, like a healing stream washing over every wound I had ever carried. That light doesn't only exist on the other side. It lives in every kind of choice we make each day. A dollar slipped to a stranger at the grocery store. A timely hug for someone on the edge. a forgiveness that expects nothing in return. Each time I finished sharing, my heart felt a little lighter. The scar inside me didn't disappear, but it became sacred. A reminder that I had lived, had loved, had fallen, and had come back. I began to write journals, blogs, and short stories about life after death. Not to prove anything, but to connect. Because I realized we are not alone. Those of us who have died, who have suffered deeply, who have lost loved ones, who have known despair, we all share one truth, the belief that love and light transcend even death. I once thought that surviving was the greatest thing I could do, but I was wrong. Living truly was the most miraculous choice I have ever made. After everything, the death, the darkness, the light, the return, I am no longer the same Penny I once was. I am Penny who has died, a Penny who has met God, a Penny who once knew, deep in her bones, what it feels like to be trapped in a prison built from her pain, resentment, and fear, a Penny who has seen with her own eyes that even the smallest act, a simple 70 cents handed over in a grocery store, can trigger a ripple effect powerful enough to change someone's entire life. I can't live the same way anymore. I can't live shallow, shrinking, guarded. I've walked through a near-death experience and come back to tell you one thing. You don't have to wait until you die to realize how much of your life you've been wasting. I began to take down, brick by brick, the walls of my inner prison, the prison I had built to protect myself from ever being hurt again. A brick of anger, a brick of abandonment, a brick of betrayal, a brick that whispered, I am not worthy. I took them all down. One brick, then another. And one day I looked around, and I was no longer inside the prison. I was standing on the rubble, and I saw freedom on the other side. I didn't choose to come back because I was brave. I came back because I hadn't truly lived. I once said to God, just let me keep this memory. If not, I'll lose all hope. And He kept His promise. Every time I start to forget, every time life begins to feel heavy again, I remember that light. I remember that voice. I remember the silence, a silence so full of love when the Creator looked at me. There was no judgment, only understanding. Complete understanding of the good, and of the parts one once hid in shame. And still, He loved me. Now when someone asks, do you know your purpose? I simply smile. I don't need a grand answer. I don't need a 5-year plan. I just need to know, whenever someone needs to be heard, I show up. Whenever someone is in pain, I share. Whenever someone asks, is there anything after death? I say, yes. And it's more beautiful than anything you could ever imagine. I choose to live to carry the light. Not my light, but the light I once touched. I don't need to be believed. I just need to listen, and to tell the story. Such folly to think that anything escapes my knowing. God held that truth in my heart for years. Now I let it shine. Because I know if you're still reading this far, you too have wrestled with doubt, felt alone, and lost your sense of direction. But I'm here to tell you, it is never too late to come alive again. It is never too late to let go. It is never too late to choose the light. If I had to die just to learn how to truly live, then you who are still breathing, how many more chances do you have? Let go. Forgive. Open the door. Say yes to life. You don't need a near-death experience to start truly living. Start now.